Good morning and welcome to Our Issues Milwaukee. I'm your host, Andrea Williams. Our focus this morning will begin on the violence that takes place in our city. Last year, there were 145 homicides in Milwaukee, the highest number since 1993. And of those 145 victims, 84% were African American. My first guest is the new director of Milwaukee's Office of Violence Prevention, Reggie Moore. He has led the Center for Youth Engagement and several other programs and services that cater to Milwaukee youth. And he's here today to tell us about the Office of Violence Prevention and his goals as its new director. Good morning, Reggie.
Good morning.
Thank you for being here. And for starters, the Office of Violence Prevention runs out of the City of Milwaukee's Health Department, and that makes a lot of sense when you look at research that shows that violence indeed affects the health of victims as well as those who witness crimes. So it actually has the same effects as epidemic disease. So it makes sense, like I said, that it would come out of the health department. Tell us more about the mission.
Right. I think nationally a lot of public health departments have taken up the issue of violence, and I think in the late 90s there was really a lot of research that really looked at how do we treat violence as a public health issue and what does that actually mean. And it's really taking the same approach that you would take to an infectious disease. And so you sort of look at what population is impacted and how are they impacted, how are they actually transmitting the disease from one person to another. And then you also start to find out what types of interventions or vaccines work in terms of preventing that transmission, and then how do you scale that to the greater population.
Wow.
And so there are communities that have done that well. There are models like Cure Violence out of Chicago, if you've ever seen the documentary, The Interrupters, that really captures the essence of what that means in practice. And they've done that work in Chicago, Baltimore, Philadelphia, and even in Iraq as well, in Baghdad. So also in other countries that have experienced, incidents of violence.
Very interesting. And before we get into your goals as the new director of OVP, I think it's important for the viewers to know a little bit more about your background. You are a Milwaukee native, and you have spent a lot of your time creating and supporting opportunities for young people. You launched the Center for Youth Engagement. You also developed and co-founded Urban Underground before serving as Director of Youth Activism at the Truth Initiative in our nation's capital. So what has been the driving force for you in trying to create opportunity and help our young people?
I think, growing up in public housing in Milwaukee, surviving the 80s in this city, I saw the importance of youth engagement in my own life. And so it wasn't until I was about 16 that I started going to the YMCA, which was 2 blocks from my house, and meeting Viola Rembert, who was at the time running the Black Achievers program there, and literally seeing how that program not only changed and saved my life, but also the lives of folks that I knew. And so I was blessed to be able to find my purpose in life early in terms of helping and working with young people. So I started by teaching art at the YMCA when I was 16, became a camp counselor, then the youth coordinator. And so pretty much my life has been a convergence, I would say, of organizing, education, and youth development ever since.
Yeah, that's very impressive. And so you went to the nation's capital and somehow ended up back in your hometown making a difference. That happens to a lot of people. I moved to DC and came back here, even though it's not my hometown, but Milwaukee has that effect. There's something that draws you back, and you go somewhere else and you kind of miss it, don't you?
Right. And I tell people all the time, if you can make it in Milwaukee, you can make it anywhere.
Yeah,
I think a lot of times we discount what it really takes to make it here.
And for a long time, the Office of Violence Prevention actually focused on domestic violence and sexual assault and things of that nature. But it's my understanding that your goal is to expand what your office is doing, especially when we look at the level of violence that we see in our city today.
Right. So 2 things I want to highlight is I think when we talk about violence, we sort of segment it out, right? We segment it out by the means of violence. So we talk about gun violence, or we talk about domestic violence. We also we segment it out by population. So we talk about youth violence, or we talk about family violence. What I really want the office to really look at is there's a common thread that runs across what drives people to inflict harm on another person. And whether that's sexual violence, whether that's gun related, the means to me are not necessarily consequential. It's really about how do we actually help people, one, not resort to violence to resolve conflict? How do we protect and support our children, whether they're in schools or in homes, from being violated? And so that's sort of a common theme, really strengthening the work that we're doing around sexual assault and domestic violence, but then also expanding the focus of the office to look at youth engagement as a prevention strategy.
Yeah, and it's not an easy thing to do when you talk about engaging with young people who probably in some instances or many instances have been exposed to violence. And we all know that that kind of builds up a certain mentality where people resort to what they know and what they've seen. And a lot of young people are also anti-establishment. So how do you tap into that mentality that's already been established and really, like Mayor Barrett said, actually show these young people that there are options and another way to live your life?
Right. I think, I think peer influence is the greatest influence, especially when you're talking about adolescence. And I also don't think there's enough research to really look at brain development. I mean, I think there are two periods of time in human development where the brain really develops rapidly, and that's obviously in the early years of development, in early childhood, but then also in early adolescence. And so we talk a lot about in terms of risk-taking that young people have and, you know, the behaviors that they engage in, but at the same time, I think a lot of their influence is also peer-driven. And so when they think about messages that they get about who they are and about what they should or shouldn't do, it really has to come from a credible source. So our commitment is not to just stay downtown in the health department, but to really, number one, get out on the street and understand what's happening and engage credible young people and young adults in the community to really reach out and support the things that are really working in the community.
I like the sound of that. You were appointed to your position by Milwaukee Mayor Tom Baer, and he recently held his 12th annual ceasefire, which goes into the churches, and he's established a relationship where he wants these faith-based organizations to help stop violence. How will you incorporate that into your position and what you're trying to accomplish?
And I think that's just one example of what we need to do. I think every sector, this is a all hands on deck issue. It's, you know, there's no zip code or corner of the city that's sort of exempt from the impact of violence, or whether, again, that's family violence or gun violence. And so it's really about how do we engage every sector of this community, and I think the faith community is a critical element of that. And so our follow-up will be, how do we support the pastors in not only just coming together that day, but staying together? And particularly in 53206, how do we work with, particularly for this summer, what the organizations in that community can do to really help work with young people and families to prevent violence before it starts.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you mentioned the summer months, because we're quickly rolling up on the warmer months, and whereas most people should be excited, especially living in an area of the country where we experience cool and cold temperatures more so than not, people a lot of times get leery, scared, all these things, because they know with the warmer temperatures, people are out, and we have a tendency to see the number of violent scenarios go up. So what do we do at this point in trying to not see what has been happening happen again this summer, specifically when you talk about gun violence and the car thefts?
Right. I think it's in terms of just human socialization, like we come out the house, there are more events that are happening. There are conflicts that may have happened during the winter months where the folks have not crossed paths, but they're more likely to cross paths when the weather is warmer. And so one of the things that I like to coin or say is the fact that in terms of respect, wealth, and weather are really significant drivers of conflict, unfortunately. And not necessarily that warm, because always when I would go to LA or nicer parts of the country or even New Orleans, I'm like, why is it so violent here? They have palm trees and the weather is nice. And so when we look at that, the fact that when you have people, whether it's large festivals or events, coming together, it's really about, again, how do we denormalize violence as a way to, because conflict is going to happen between human beings. The issue is, how do we, number one, we have a lot of guns in our community. How do we address that issue? And two, we've always had guns. In terms of, there are people who hunt, there are folks who just have had guns in their homes, but it has not resulted to the level of homicides and non-fatal shootings that we've seen in recent years. And so how do we begin to address and dial back the thinking that leads to people inflicting harm through gun violence on each other? Yeah,
and I know there's some people at home probably saying, okay, this all sounds good, but how do we really make it happen? How do we really, and it's not something that's going to happen overnight, and nobody's going to snap their fingers and things change, we all know that, but it really is going to be a situation where you have to work with a lot of different organizations that are already, pointing that their goal is to also curb the violence, and then together you make a difference in that way. So what are some of the, or who are some of the organizations that you have teamed up with or that are used as resources in making your position what it is?
Right, and I mean, this is not an exhaustive list, but I think we have examples all around this community of people who are working really hard in their local neighborhoods on a school-wide level to really reach young people and families. I like to point out in terms of Mohia Ben Kwabena and the work that they do in schools and detention centers. You have Safe and Sound. There's a lot of organizations, and one of the interventions that we're also looking to continue this summer is called Safe Zones, and that was developed by Khalil Coleman and Sean Moore with support from President Hamilton to really look at how do we work in high priority areas of the city and really get folks on the street and interrupt the cycle of violence. And that's a model that's inspired by the Cure Violence model out of Chicago, where you really are engaging community residents and taking back their community and really building community with each other, but also intervening and preventing incidents of violence.
Yes, and you have actually, you just mentioned something out of Chicago that has been working. You've actually examined several city plans, including Minneapolis and others, to create a strategy or a blueprint that will work here in Milwaukee as well. And I just thought it was really important when we talk about violence being a concern of every resident here. I thought it was important for them to meet you and to understand exactly what it is your goals are in this position. And I just want to lastly just kind of mention those major things that really break our hearts when we look at the lives of innocent children being taken away because there are people out here who don't care about human life in general, or their own for that matter. So we most recently seen 10-year-old Zalea Jenkins sitting at home watching TV shot. Those things, they cannot continue to happen. Of course, there was 5-year-old Layla Peterson, 13-month-old Bill Tao, and then 10-year-old Sierra Guyton, who was playing on the playground. I mean, they are our future, and they are losing their lives because of gun violence and the mentalities of people who just don't care. But those are the people that we have to reach, right? So finally, just tell us how are we reaching the people who are in a neighborhood shooting, not caring where the bullet goes?
So there's a couple of things I want to address. So one, I think there's been a driving misconception that young people are the source of crime. It can be a 50-year-old who commits a homicide and people say, we need to do something about these kids, right?
That's true.
And so unfortunately, the young people are actually the ones that are doing the dying. And unfortunately, they're dying at the hands of 20 to 30-year-olds. And so you're right, there's a population of adults in this community that we really need to look at. And so when we look at unemployment, when we look at post-traumatic stress disorder and all of the trauma that I think people are living with and not finding a source of healing from, they begin to inflict that pain on each other. And so there's a lot of, I think, support and attention that we need to focus on that population. And so I think that's a critical piece that we have to address.
Okay, is there anything else that you wanted our viewers at home to know before we wrap up?
I would say one more thing is the fact that this office isn't the total solution.
Correct.
Our role is not to create programming. Our role is to help build the capacity and help us do work smarter in this community. And so we can do all the marches and rallies and fairs that we want to do, but if we're not targeting the right areas or the right populations and really employing strategies that work, we won't see a difference. And so I just really want to encourage people to, if you want to be the solution to violence, look in your own family, look at your own circle of friends and influence, and come off the porch, come out the house, and get involved. We need you.
All right, and you're using several resources such as the Medical College of Wisconsin, Homicide Review Commission, Community Justice Council, and others to help make it happen. And I'm excited for you, and I do think that the mayor made the right choice because you've had your finger on the pulse of what's going on in our community for a long time, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you can do with the help of all of us working together. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Reggie Moore is the director of the City of Milwaukee Health Department's Office of Violence Prevention. And for more information, you can visit city.milwaukee.gov/health or call 414-286-CITY. When we return to Our Issues Milwaukee, we'll switch gears and discuss the autoimmune disease known as lupus and a foundation devoted to solving the mystery of lupus while giving support to those who suffer from its brutal impact. We'll find out more about the Lupus Foundation of America Wisconsin chapter right after this.